So right now, sitting on the shelves of, tens of thousands of pharmacies across the country is a drug that doctors know can cause fatal, uncontrollable bleeding.
Yeah, and they prescribe it to millions of people every single day.
Right, which is just wild to think about. Welcome to our deep dive. Today we are unpacking a really fascinating pharmacological briefing, and our mission is to explore the paradox of the FDA's black box warning.
It's a system we've all kind of brushed up against, even if we didn't realize it. I mean, we've all had that surreal experience watching television.
Oh, absolutely. You're watching a football game or like a baking show, and a commercial comes on for a new prescription medication.
And the first 45 seconds are just pure sun-drenched bliss.
Yeah, couples riding tandem bicycles, someone looking out a window with a warm mug of tea.
Exactly. But then right at the end, the music completely drops out.
And this voiceover kicks in, talking at roughly the speed of sound.
Right, and they're listing off just the most terrifying things you've ever heard.
May cause liver failure, fatal arrhythmias, sudden cardiovascular events. And you're just sitting on your couch wondering, why are those people still smiling on the beach if this pill might actually kill them?
It's jarring, yeah. That tonal whiplash is intense. But that fast-talking voiceover isn't just an accident of marketing.
No, it's not.
It is the audible surface of a massive, heavily regulated safety apparatus. So today, we're pulling back the curtain on the FDA's strongest safety alert. They officially call it a boxed warning.
Right, and we're going to decode what this alert actually means when you're sitting at the bedside with your doctor. Because it's a regulatory tool designed to save lives. But shockingly, it can sometimes cause unintended harm.
Yeah, and to really understand how that happens, we kind of have to start with the physical reality of prescription drugs.
You mean the paperwork?
Exactly. Not the pill itself, but the infamous package insert.
Oh man, anyone who has ever opened a medication box and unrolled one of those tiny tissue paper documents knows what you're talking about. It's like a map of the human genome folded into an accordion.
It really is. The density of information is just staggering. You've got dense paragraphs of pharmacokinetic data, dosing schedules, chemical structures.
And just dozens of possible adverse reactions.
Right.
So pharmacokinetic data, that's essentially the deep science of how the body processes the chemical, right?
Right.
Which most people are never going to read.
Almost no one. Yeah.
But if I'm a busy clinician, let's say I have maybe 15 minutes with a patient, I'm trying to diagnose them, chart my notes, figure out a treatment plan, and answer their questions all at once.
Which is a huge cognitive load.
Exactly. So if I need to look up a drug right then and there, I have maybe 30 seconds to skim that label. I don't have time to read a novel.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm facing severe information overload.
And that information overload is exactly what the boxed warning was created to solve.
Okay, so it's a triage tool.
Precisely.
Right.
Under federal regulations, specifically Section 21 CFR 201.57 JACE, the FDA requires a very specific visual format for a drug's most critical safety information.
Physically, it's a warning printed inside a bold, thick black border, right at the very top of the prescribing info.
Yeah, so no prescriber could possibly miss it. Functionally, it signals that the FDA has determined this drug carries a risk of death or serious injury.
Right.
A risk significant enough to require special counseling before using it. But, and this is key, the drug remains legally on the market.
It makes me think of those emergency alerts that push through on your smartphone.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Because, you get 100 notifications a day, emails, texts, a health app telling you to drink water.
And you just tune them out.
Right. Those are like the minor side effects on a drug label. Mild headache, some nausea. You ignore them. But when the phone suddenly buzzes with that loud, jarring alarm for a flash flood warning.
That cuts through the noise.
Exactly. You drop everything and pay attention to this specific danger right now.
And the box exists purely to establish that hierarchy. I mean, if every single risk, from a mild rash to liver failure, is printed in the exact same font size, human nature dictates that attention will just drift.
Right. Risk communication needs visual salience.
Exactly. And the modern version of this box was born from the FDA's massive 1979 overhaul of labeling rules.
Because for decades, life or death info was just getting buried.
Yeah, and they were pushed to act by some really dark historical shocks.
Right, because regulation usually follows tragedy. And the sources point out that the most formative shock here was the thalidomide catastrophe in the late 50s and early 60s.
Yes, that was a sedative heavily marketed in Europe, mostly prescribed to pregnant women for morning sickness.
And the results were just devastating. It caused thousands of severe birth defects worldwide.
Primarily phocomelia, which involves severe malformations of the limbs.
But the crazy thing is, thalidomide was kept off the U.S. market almost entirely because of one highly skeptical FDA reviewer named Frances Kelsey.
Frances Kelsey is a legend in pharmacology. She basically used bureaucratic mechanisms as a shield.
Just kept demanding more data from the manufacturer.
Exactly. She refused to approve it despite intense corporate pressure because she noticed some troubling reports of nerve damage in adults from Europe.
Right, peripheral neuritis. And she reasoned, like, if it's doing this to adults, what on earth is it doing to a developing fetus?
Her stubbornness literally saved countless American families from that tragedy, and it gave the political momentum needed to pass the 1962 Kefauver-Harris Amendment.
Which was huge, because for the first time, drug companies had to actually prove a drug was effective, not just safe, before getting approval.
Right. But regulators soon realized that just knowing a risk existed didn't matter if the prescribing doctor didn't see the warning.
Which brings us to the antibiotic chloramphenicol.
Yeah, chloramphenicol was a broad-spectrum antibiotic linked to a rare but fatal condition called aplastic anemia.
Which is basically complete bone marrow failure.
Exactly. The drug was highly effective for infections, but this rare risk of death was just buried deep in the standard text. Doctors were prescribing it for routine infections, completely unaware they were rolling the dice on bone marrow failure.
Wow. So it proved that a fatal risk could easily get lost as routine text. You had to make it visually impossible to ignore.
Which is why, by 1979, the black-bordered box became the standard.
But this brings us to what is probably the most misunderstood part of this whole system. A drug with a black box warning is still sitting right there on the pharmacy shelf.
It is.
So let me put on my concerned patient hat for a second.
Okay, go for it.
If I go to my doctor and they prescribe me a medication that has a bold black box saying may cause fatal bleeding, shouldn't my doctor already know to just, not give it to me?
It's the most logical question. And to understand why it's still prescribed, we have to separate a boxed warning from a contraindication.
Let me guess. A contraindication is the actual stop sign.
Bingo. A contraindication is an absolute prohibition. It means do not use this drug in this specific patient population, period.
Like if a patient is pregnant, a drug known to cause birth defects is contraindicated. End of discussion.
Exactly. But a boxed warning is a conditional caution. It's a yield sign. The FDA uses it when a risk is highly serious, but the drug's benefits for certain patients still outweigh that risk.
Which perfectly circles back to the drug I mentioned at the very beginning of our deep dive, warfarin.
Yes, warfarin.
It's a blood thinner. And it has carried a box warning for major, potentially fatal bleeding for its entire modern prescribing life.
Which makes sense because its entire job is to stop your blood from clotting. The mechanism of the drug is fundamentally the risk.
Right. Warfarin has been used for over 60 years. It's one of the most widely prescribed drugs globally for preventing strokes.
So the black box on warfarin doesn't say don't use this. It says use this carefully, with informed consent and with very close monitoring.
It's meant to start a conversation, not shut it down.
Exactly. It's an instrument of informed consent. And the really fascinating part is that these warnings aren't carved in stone forever.
Right, because of pharmacovigilance.
Yeah.
Which is basically keeping a watchful eye on the drug once it's out in the wild, not just in the lab.
That ongoing surveillance is so critical. When a drug is approved, its safety profile is based on clinical trials, right? Maybe 3,000 to 5,000 participants.
Which is a lot of people, but still.
Statistically, it is only a first draft of the drug's true safety profile.
It's like testing a new car on a closed track. You run it through a wind tunnel, check the brakes, crash test it. But pharmacovigilance is seeing what happens when 1 million people drive that same car in the snow, off-road, for 10 years.
You're going to see rare things, 1 in a million failures that just couldn't pop up in a controlled test of 3,000 people.
So the FDA uses systems like FAERS, the Adverse Event Reporting System, to gather that real-world data.
And as millions of patients take a drug, new evidence emerges. The boxed warning is the mechanism for revising that first draft.
But throwing a giant black box on a label doesn't just inform doctors. It alters their behavior, right? And sometimes that completely backfires.
It can create a massive chilling effect. Consider the 2001 boxed warning on a drug called droperidol.
Droperidol, that was an anti-nausea drug.
Right. Yeah, an antiemetic and a sedative. It was cheap, highly effective, a staple in ERs for decades. But in 2001, the FDA suddenly mandated a boxed warning for potentially fatal heart arrhythmias.
Wait, citing reports of QT interval prolongation, right? Is that essentially an electrical misfire in the heart's rhythm?
That's a great way to visualize it. The electrical reset phase of the heartbeat takes slightly too long, triggering a chaotic rhythm. So the FDA saw reports and acted, but ER doctors pushed back furiously.
Because the devil was in the dosage, wasn't it? Droperidol was also used in psychiatric settings at massive doses to calm agitated patients.
You hit the nail on the head. The adverse reports were mostly tied to doses far higher than the tiny amounts used for nausea in the ER.
But the black box didn't nuance that for the busy clinician.
Nope. So hospitals and doctors just abandoned droperidol entirely.
Defensive prescribing. I mean, if I'm an ER doctor, I don't want the liability of giving a drug with a black box for fatal arrhythmias, even if I know the risk at my tiny dose is basically zero.
Exactly. So they switched to alternatives like ondansetron. But that was significantly more expensive and, by some measure, less effective for severe nausea.
Wow, so the chilling effect actually produced worse aggregate outcomes. The cure was worse than the disease.
And this leads us to easily the most charged, controversial example in our sources. The 2004 antidepressant warning.
Oh man, this one is heavy. And it's important we look at this impartially because it's a debate that still divides the medical community today.
It really does. In 2004, the FDA found a small but statistically significant increase in suicidal thinking and behavior in patients under 18 taking antidepressants compared to a placebo.
Note that it was an increase in suicidal ideation, not completed suicides.
Right. But based on that data, the FDA required a boxed warning on all antidepressants regarding increased suicidality risk for youth up to age 24.
Which, if you're a parent listening to this, imagine the position that puts you in. Your teenager is suffering from severe depression, you go to a doctor for a lifeline, and you're told the drug that might save their life has a government warning that it could increase suicidal thoughts.
It's an agonizing choice. And the prevailing clinical theory for why this happens is actually paradoxical.
How so?
Well, severe depression often causes profound lethargy. A patient might have suicidal thoughts, but lack the physical energy to act on them.
Right.
When they start an antidepressant, the physical energy often returns weeks before the mood-lifting cognitive benefits kick in.
Oh, I see. So during that window, they suddenly have the energy to act on those underlying thoughts.
Exactly. So the warning was meant to tell doctors and parents, watch these young patients incredibly closely during those first few weeks.
But again, we run into the chilling effect.
A fierce national debate erupted. Researchers like biostatistician Robert Gibbons published analyses showing that after the 2004 warning, antidepressant prescribing to youth just plummeted.
Doctors were terrified to prescribe them, and parents were terrified to use them.
And tragically, in that same period, completed youth suicide rates actually rose. Gibbons argues the warning deterred appropriate life-saving treatment, and that lack of treatment cost lives.
So they argue the warning actively prevented depressed kids from getting the help they desperately needed. But what is the counter-argument from the regulatory side?
The FDA and supporters of the warning maintain that it did exactly what it was supposed to do. It curbed a dangerous era of off-label prescribing to kids.
Meaning drugs being prescribed for age groups they hadn't been explicitly approved for.
Right. They argued the black box forced doctors to try other therapies first and mandated vital monitoring. They also point out that linking the drop in prescriptions directly to the rise in suicides is a statistical correlation, not proven causation.
Because there are so many other societal variables that impact suicide rates.
Exactly.
So we have two totally different interpretations of the exact same public health intervention. It just highlights the impossible tightrope regulators walk.
It really does.
Because if the FDA is constantly terrified of being blamed for underwarning, if they underwarn and people die, there are congressional hearings.
True.
So eventually, my computer screen as a doctor is going to be covered in black boxes. Doesn't that just lead to warning fatigue?
Warning fatigue is a massive clinical vulnerability. It's just like alarm fatigue in an intensive care unit.
Where the machines beep so much for minor things that the nurses stop hearing them.
Right, and then they might miss the one alarm signaling a true cardiac arrest. When dozens of common drugs carry boxed warnings, the visual device loses its power.
So given all this pressure, can the FDA ever walk a warning back? Can they look at the data and say, you know what, we were too cautious, let's remove the box?
Reversals are rare, but they do happen. The textbook example in our briefing is varenicline, better known as the smoking cessation drug Chantix.
Oh, yeah.
In 2009, the FDA added a boxed warning based on post-marketing reports of severe neuropsychiatric symptoms: depression, agitation, suicidal ideation.
And for nearly a decade, that warning severely limited its use, even though it was highly effective at helping people quit smoking.
But then a massive trial called EAGLES changed everything. They set up a randomized controlled trial specifically to test this exact question, even including patients with a history of psychiatric issues.
And the scale of that trial was unprecedented for this specific question, right?
It was. They compared Chantix against a placebo, nicotine patches, and another drug. And they conclusively found no statistically significant increase in those severe psychiatric events compared to the alternatives.
Wow. So the real-world reports that triggered the warning were just background noise. Because, I mean, people trying to quit smoking cold turkey often experience agitation and depression anyway.
Precisely. It was a false signal. And in December 2016, the FDA actually took the rare step of removing the boxed warning.
That's fascinating. It proves that the system can correct itself when rigorous data arise.
It does. But while they removed the box for Chantix, they've also been applying it in much broader strokes lately.
Right, covering entire classes of drugs, like the NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs like ibuprofen.
Yeah, after the painkiller Vioxx was withdrawn in 2004 due to cardiovascular risks, the FDA eventually placed cardiovascular and gastrointestinal boxed warnings on essentially the entire class of NSAIDs.
Because mathematically, NSAIDs alter the balance of prostaglandins in the body, which can increase blood pressure. But you have clinicians arguing that treating clinically distinct drugs as completely interchangeable is a mistake.
It's like punishing the safer members of a drug family for the sins of the most dangerous member.
It's a blunt regulatory instrument.
It really is. And sometimes regulators decide that even a blunt warning box isn't enough. When just disclosing a risk isn't sufficient, the FDA layers on a REMS.
REMS? Risk evaluation and mitigation strategy.
This is for drugs where the risk is so profound it requires active restriction and compliance. A classic example is isotretinoin, used for severe acne.
Because it causes severe birth defects if taken during pregnancy.
Certainty of birth defects, yeah. So it has a boxed warning, but it's also paired with the IPLD program. Patients, prescribers, and pharmacies must register in a central database and prove compliance with pregnancy testing every single month just to dispense the drug.
Wow.
We also see REMS heavily utilized in the opioid crisis now. The box has evolved into the foundation for enforced digital compliance systems.
So, bringing this all back to you, the listener, the next time you hear that fast-talking drug commercial or you're discussing a new prescription with your doctor, you're not just hearing a random list of side effects.
No, you're witnessing the machinery of the boxed warning at work.
A system born from historical tragedies, designed to cut through information overload. And it's constantly balancing the razor's edge between saving lives and causing unintended harm. Ultimately, it's meant to empower you in a shared decision-making process with your doctor.
And as we look to the future, our source material poses a really provocative question. The black box warning was designed in 1979 for a world of paper package inserts. But today, the field of pharmacogenomics is exploding. We're learning how your specific genetic makeup dictates exactly how your body will process a drug.
Right, we're certainly not relying on tissue paper folded like an accordion anymore.
So shouldn't our warnings evolve alongside our science? Imagine a future where that static, one-size-fits-all black border is replaced by tiered digital warnings customized entirely to a patient's unique DNA profile.
So for you, a specific drug might flag bright red on your doctor's tablet because your genetics indicate a high risk of a fatal arrhythmia.
But for the patient in the next room, the exact same drug flags green. It really prompts us to wonder if the era of the static paper black box is finally coming to an end, making way for precision risk communication.
A personalized warning system encoded to your own DNA. Now that cuts through the noise even better than an emergency alert on a smartphone.